Have you ever looked back at a conversation and suddenly realized a woman might have been interested in you, but you didn't notice it at the time? For many men, that realization comes far too late, days later, sometimes even years later. In the moment, it simply felt like a normal conversation. She was friendly, curious, maybe a little warm in her tone, but nothing seemed obvious enough to interpret as attraction. The truth is, many women don't express interest in a direct or obvious way, especially when they're talking to a mature man. They rarely say things like, "I'm attracted to you," or "I'd like to get closer to you." Instead, they communicate interest in quieter, more subtle ways. Rather than making bold statements, they often ask questions. To most men, these questions sound harmless, casual, just part of small talk. But beneath the surface, they can carry a very different meaning. They can be a woman's way of gently exploring whether a deeper connection might be possible. This is particularly common when a woman feels drawn to a man who carries maturity, calmness, and life experience. She may not want to appear too forward or risk rejection, so she hides her curiosity inside conversation. And here's what many men never realize. When a woman feels a certain level of interest, she often asks two very specific questions. They sound simple, almost ordinary, but in many cases, they are quiet signals that she's trying to understand whether there's space in your life and whether you're the kind of man she could move closer to. Once you recognize these questions, you may start noticing signals you never saw before. One of the biggest misunderstandings between men and women comes from how differently they communicate attraction. Many men expect interest to be obvious. They look for clear signals, direct compliments, strong flirting, or obvious invitations. But women often approach attraction in a much more subtle and careful way. For many women, expressing romantic interest directly can feel risky. If they show too much enthusiasm too quickly, they may worry about being judged, rejected, or misunderstood. Because of this, many women prefer to explore a man's personality and emotional energy before revealing how they truly feel. Instead of making bold statements, they begin with curiosity. Questions become a safe and natural way to understand a man without exposing their own vulnerability too quickly. Through conversation, a woman can observe how a man thinks, how he reacts, and how emotionally present he is. This approach allows her to evaluate something very important: emotional safety. Before a woman moves toward deeper connection, she often looks for three key qualities in a man. First is emotional stability. She wants to sense whether the man is calm, grounded, and comfortable with himself. Second is availability. Not just physical availability, but emotional openness. Is he someone who allows people into his life, or does he keep everyone at a distance? Third is awareness. Can he notice subtle cues and respond with presence, or does he move through conversations without truly paying attention? These qualities often reveal themselves naturally through simple conversation. What might seem like casual questions are often small, emotional tests, not tests meant to trap or judge a man, but ways for a woman to understand whether a deeper connection could feel comfortable and natural. When a man responds with calm confidence and clarity, something shifts in her perception. She begins to see him not just as someone she's talking to, but as someone she could genuinely connect with. Many men believe that as they get older, their chances of attracting women begin to fade. They assume that youth is the main factor that creates attraction. But in reality, the dynamic is often more complex than that. For many women, maturity can be incredibly appealing. A man who has lived through different chapters of life often carries qualities that are difficult to fake: calmness, emotional control, patience, and a clearer understanding of what truly matters. These traits create a sense of stability that many women find comforting and attractive. Younger men are often still discovering who they are. Their direction, priorities, and emotional responses may change frequently as they navigate different stages of life. While this energy can be exciting, it can also feel uncertain. A mature man, on the other hand, often brings something different into a conversation. His presence tends to feel steadier, his reactions are less impulsive, he may speak with more thoughtfulness and listen with more patience. For many women, this kind of presence creates a feeling of emotional safety, and when a woman feels safe and understood, her curiosity naturally grows. She becomes more interested in learning about the man behind the conversation, how he lives, what he values, and whether his life has space for someone new. This is why attraction toward mature men often appears in quieter ways. Instead of obvious flirting, women may approach with thoughtful conversation and subtle curiosity. And it's within these conversations that the two key questions often appear. They are not random. They are gentle ways of discovering whether the man she's speaking to is someone she could imagine becoming closer to.
At first glance, the questions a woman asks in conversation may seem completely ordinary. They sound like simple curiosity, the kind of topics people bring up when they are getting to know each other. But in many cases, these questions carry a deeper purpose that most men overlook. They are not just about gathering information, they are about understanding the man behind the words. When a woman begins to feel a certain level of interest, she often becomes more attentive to the emotional qualities of the man she is speaking with. She wants to sense what kind of presence he carries. Is he calm and grounded or restless and uncertain? Is he open to connection or emotionally distant? Questions become her way of exploring these things without creating pressure. Rather than directly expressing attraction, she observes how a man responds to everyday conversation. His tone, confidence, and clarity can reveal far more than the actual words he uses. In this way, simple questions become small windows into a man's character. Through these questions, she is often looking for two very important signals. The first signal is openness. She wants to feel that the man has room in his life for connection, that he is not emotionally closed off or completely absorbed in his own routines. The second signal is direction. She wants to understand whether the man has a sense of purpose in his life, whether he knows who he is and what he values. These two qualities create a powerful combination. A man who is open but also grounded in his direction often appears confident, stable, and emotionally balanced. And when a woman senses those qualities, her interest naturally grows. That is why certain questions appear again and again in conversations where attraction is quietly beginning to form. The first of these questions often reveals whether there is space in a man's life for someone new. The first question that often appears when a woman feels curious about a man may sound very simple. In fact, many men hear it and think nothing of it at all. She might ask something like, "Do you spend a lot of time alone?" At first glance, it sounds like casual conversation. But beneath the surface, this question often carries a deeper meaning. It is rarely about loneliness. Instead, it is about emotional access. When a woman asks this question, she is quietly trying to understand whether there is room in your life for someone else. She wants to sense whether you are open to connection or whether your life is already closed off to new relationships. Women often phrase this curiosity in different ways. She might ask, "Do you usually go out by yourself?" Or, "Are you seeing anyone these days?" Sometimes it sounds even simpler, like, "Do you enjoy being on your own most of the time?" Although the wording changes, the intention behind it is often the same. She is exploring whether your world has space for her presence. If she felt no interest in you at all, she likely would not care how you spend your time. But when a woman begins to feel drawn to someone, she naturally wonders what his life looks like beyond the moment they are sharing. She begins imagining whether she could fit somewhere within that world. This is where many men unintentionally miss the signal. They respond too literally. They treat the question as a simple request for information. A man might answer with something brief like, "Yes, I'm alone most of the time," or "Not really, I stay busy." These responses may be honest, but they often close the emotional door the woman was gently opening. A more balanced response shows both independence and openness. For example, a man might say, "I enjoy my own time, but I always appreciate good company." Another simple response could be, "I value my routines, but life is always better when you share it with the right people. Answers like these communicate something important. They show that you are comfortable with yourself, yet still open to meaningful connection. And that combination often creates a feeling of warmth and possibility in the conversation. When a woman senses that openness, she may feel comfortable taking the next step in her curiosity. That is when the second question often appears, the one that reveals even more about what she is truly trying to understand.
If the first question helps a woman understand whether there is space in your life, the second question helps her understand something even more important, your direction. At some point in the conversation, she may ask something like, "So, what are you looking for these days?" Sometimes the wording is slightly different. She might say, "What are you focusing on in life right now?" Or, "What do you want in this stage of your life?" In other situations, she might simply ask, "What are you hoping to find these days?" No matter how it is phrased, the meaning behind the question is very similar. She is trying to understand the direction of your life. For many women, especially when they are speaking with a mature man, direction matters a great deal. They want to sense that the man in front of them is not simply drifting through life. They want to feel that he has purpose, clarity, and a sense of movement towards something meaningful. This does not mean she expects a perfect life plan or a detailed explanation of your future. What she is really looking for is emotional clarity. She wants to hear that you understand yourself and that your life is guided by intention rather than uncertainty. Unfortunately, this is another moment where many men unintentionally weaken the conversation. Some respond with phrases like, "I'm just going with the flow," or "I'm not really sure right now." While these answers might seem relaxed and honest, they can sometimes create the impression that a man lacks direction or purpose. A stronger response does not need to be long or complicated. In fact, the most effective answers are usually simple and confident. For example, a man might say, "I'm focusing on building a life that feels meaningful and balanced." Another response could be, "Right now, I'm enjoying life, meeting good people, and creating experiences that matter." These kinds of answers communicate something important. They show that you are moving forward, that you have awareness of what you value, and that your life has a sense of direction. When a woman hears that clarity, it becomes easier for her to imagine herself somewhere within that path. And when both questions have been answered with calm confidence, openness in the first and direction in the second, the conversation often begins to carry a very different kind of energy. To understand how these questions appear in real life, imagine a simple moment. You are having a relaxed conversation with a woman, perhaps at a cafe, a social gathering, a bookstore, or even through an online chat. The conversation feels easy. There is no pressure. She smiles, maintains comfortable eye contact, and seems genuinely engaged in what you are saying. You notice that she listens carefully and occasionally laughs a little more than the situation requires. The atmosphere feels warm and natural. Then, at some point in the conversation, she asks a simple question. "So, do you spend a lot of time alone?" To many men, this sounds like harmless small talk. But in reality, it can be her first emotional step toward understanding you better. She is quietly exploring whether there is room in your life for connection. If your response carries calmness and openness, the conversation continues to flow naturally. The atmosphere remains comfortable and her curiosity often grows. A little later in the conversation, sometimes minutes later, sometimes during another conversation entirely, another question appears. "What are you looking for these days?" This moment is slightly deeper. It moves beyond casual curiosity and into understanding your mindset and direction. She is trying to sense whether your life has purpose, clarity, and emotional presence. These two questions often act like checkpoints in the flow of attraction. They help her decide whether moving closer to you emotionally would feel natural and safe. When a man responds with confidence, balance, and awareness, the conversation can become noticeably more engaging. But if he answers with uncertainty or dismisses the moment entirely, the energy often fades just as quietly as it appeared. One reason many men overlook these moments is that they expect attraction to appear in obvious ways. They look for direct compliments, clear flirting, or unmistakable signals that leave little room for doubt. But attraction does not always appear that way. For many women, especially in more mature conversations, interest is expressed through subtle curiosity rather than bold statements. Questions, tone of voice, eye contact, and emotional warmth often carry far more meaning than the words themselves. Because of this difference in communication styles, many men interpret these questions only at the surface level. They hear them as simple conversation topics rather than as opportunities to connect more deeply. Another reason is that many men focus on giving the correct answer instead of responding with presence. They think about what to say rather than paying attention to the feeling behind the conversation. Yet, attraction often grows in the emotional space between words. When a man becomes aware of these subtle signals, he begins to notice patterns that once seemed invisible. Conversations start to feel more intentional, and moments that once passed unnoticed suddenly become clear invitations to connect. Awareness, more than anything else, is what transforms these simple questions into meaningful moments of understanding. The key insight for mature men is simple. Women test presence, not performance. They aren't looking for long explanations, flashy gestures, or displays of wealth or status. What they notice most is how emotionally awake and aware you are in the moment. The first question, do you spend a lot of time alone, reveals whether a man is open to connection. The second, what are you looking for these days, shows whether he is moving with purpose. Together, these questions help her understand whether she can safely invest emotionally in you. A man who responds with calm clarity, emotional balance, and self-awareness creates an irresistible combination. He signals that his life has space for meaningful connection and that he is not drifting or emotionally unavailable. This naturally attracts women who are looking for depth, stability, and authenticity. The deeper lesson is that attraction often happens beneath the surface of words. Women communicate subtly because they are assessing energy, awareness, and emotional presence. When a man recognizes these signals and responds with presence, he becomes someone she can trust, feel safe with, and ultimately be drawn toward.